If you've ever stared at a bank balance that should have made you happy and felt nothing but a quiet, gnawing unease, this story is for you, because the problem was never the number. You've been solving the wrong equation your entire life, and no amount of zeros was ever going to balance it. Today I want to tell you about a merchant who got everything he ever asked for, and a monk who owned almost nothing, and a question that passed between them one evening that neither of them ever forgot. The monk answered in 7 words. Just 7. And once you hear them, you may never look at your own accounts the same way again. But to understand why those 7 words landed the way they did, you need to understand the man who received them. Before we go there, tell me something in the comments. When was the last time a number in your bank account actually made you feel safe? Not for a moment, but for real. For longer than a day. I ask because I already know the answer for most of us, and I think you might be surprised how many people reading this are nodding right now. His name was Kava, and by the time he was 40, he had done what almost no one in his province had done before him. He had turned a single cart of dyed cloth into 4 warehouses, a fleet of river barges, and a house so large that his own children sometimes got lost in it looking for him. The house had 31 rooms. He had counted them once in the early years, the way a man counts blessings. By the time this story takes place, he had stopped counting. He had started weighing instead. Every evening, after the shutters were drawn and the servants had gone quiet, Kaveh sat at a low desk in the room farthest from the noise of his own household, and he opened a leather ledger with a spine cracked soft from use. He was not checking whether he had enough. He already knew, in the coldest arithmetic sense, that he did. He was checking whether he had more than he'd had the week before. If the number had grown, he slept. If it had merely held steady, he did not. You already know a version of this man. Maybe you've never owned a warehouse in your life, but you know what it is to open an app before bed and feel your chest tighten depending on what 4 digits appear on the screen. You know what it is to have enough by any reasonable measure and still lie there running the numbers again, as if repetition might change what they mean. Kava's wife knew the shape of his evenings by the sound of the ledger closing. Some nights it closed gently. Other nights it closed like a door in a wind. On one of the second kind of nights, unable to sleep himself, he wrapped a plain coat over his silk undershirt and walked out past the warehouses toward the river, where he knew an old monk kept a small stone hut beside the ferry crossing. He wasn't sure why he went. He told himself later it was only to clear his head. But what he didn't know, walking down that dark road, was that this was the last night he would ever calculate his worth the same way again. The monk's name, in the few records that survive, was simply given as the ferry monk, because he lived beside the crossing and helped travelers who couldn't pay find their way across anyway. His hut had 1 shelf, 1 bowl, 1 blanket folded in thirds, and no door. Only a curtain of woven reeds that moved when the wind moved. Kaveh had passed this hut 100 times on his way to inspect his barges. He had never once gone inside. That night, for reasons he couldn't fully name, he did. The monk was awake, sitting cross-legged near a low fire, and he didn't seem surprised to see a wealthy stranger duck through his curtain at that hour. He gestured to the space across the fire without a word. Kaveh sat. And this is where everything changed, though neither man knew it yet. For a while they said nothing. The fire cracked. The river moved past outside, indifferent, the way rivers are. Kaveh noticed, almost against his will, how little the hut contained, and how strange it was that a man with so little seemed to be taking up so much room in the silence, not with words, but with a kind of stillness Kaveh hadn't felt in his own house in years, despite its 31 rooms. He found himself, for the first time in a long while, not thinking about the ledger at all, and that alone unsettled him more than the visit itself. Finally, Kaveh spoke, and what came out surprised even him, because he hadn't planned to say it. He said, "I have more than any man in 3 provinces, and every night I check to see if I have more than I did the night before. I don't know why I can't stop." He expected the monk to lecture him. He expected talk of greed, of sin, of the poor he was failing to help. Instead, the monk asked a single question, quietly, almost gently. "What are you afraid will happen if the number stops growing?" Kaveh opened his mouth to answer and found there was nothing there. He had never once asked himself that question in 15 years of ledgers. He sat with it the way you might sit with a splinter you've just noticed after walking on it for miles. Remember this detail. It matters later, because the fear underneath the number is never really about the number. It's about what the number is standing guard over. The monk let the silence sit for a long time before he spoke again. He told Kaveh that he had once, many years before becoming a monk, been a moneylender's apprentice in a city 2 rivers from here, and that he remembered exactly the feeling Kaveh was describing, because he had lived inside it every day for 6 years. He remembered the specific texture of it, not sadness, not quite fear, but a kind of low static that never fully switched off, a hum underneath every good thing that happened to him. He got a promotion, and the hum was still there. He got married, and it was still there. Quieter for a week, then back. And this is where the story does something you won't expect. The monk did not become a monk because he found peace. He became a monk because he finally understood what the hum actually was. He told Kaveh this. He said the hum was not about money at all. It was fear wearing a number as a disguise because a number feels solvable, and the real fear underneath it does not. If you're afraid you are not enough as a person, a bigger house cannot answer that, because the house was never being asked the question. But a number on a ledger looks like it could be an answer, so we keep feeding it, hoping this time the math will finally quiet the fear instead of just, for a night or two, distracting it. Kaveh sat back from the fire. Something in his chest had gone very still, the way a room goes still right before someone says something you'll remember for the rest of your life. He asked the monk then, the only question that felt worth asking. Then what actually makes it stop? What's the answer if the number isn't it? The monk was quiet again, long enough that Kaveh wondered if he would answer at all. Then he picked up his one wooden bowl from beside the fire, turned it over so Kaveh could see it was empty, set it back down, and said the 7 words that Kaveh would repeat to his own children 30 years later, on his own deathbed, as the truest thing he had ever learned. He said, "You already have what enough feels like." That was all. No lecture followed. No instructions on how to give away his warehouses. No demand that he become poor to become wise. Just those 7 words, sitting in the space between 2 men and a fire that was starting to burn low. Kaveh didn't understand them that night. Not fully. He walked home before dawn, turning the sentence over the way you turn a stone in your pocket, feeling its shape without yet knowing what it's for. What the monk meant was this: enough is not a threshold you cross and then feel safe on the other side of. Enough is a feeling you either allow yourself to have or don't, independent of the number entirely. You have already felt it, in a quiet morning with nowhere urgent to be, in a meal eaten slowly with someone you love, in the 10 minutes before sleep when nothing was wrong and you weren't checking anything. That feeling was enough. It was never waiting on the other side of a bigger figure. It was available the whole time, and the ledger was simply loud enough to drown it out. This is the part of the story that applies to you directly, whatever your own version of the ledger looks like. That merchant is you, every time you refresh a banking app hoping the number will finally deliver a feeling that no number was ever built to deliver. Money can buy safety from certain very real and specific dangers: hunger, exposure, a medical bill you couldn't otherwise pay. It was never built to buy the feeling of being fundamentally, personally, permanently okay. That feeling runs on a different current entirely, one that has nothing to do with digits, and confusing the two is not a moral failing. It is simply the most common mistake a mind makes when it's frightened and looking for something solid to hold. The technical word for this confusion is attachment. Not attachment to money as an object, but attachment to the idea that safety is a place you eventually arrive at, rather than a practice you return to. As long as safety is a destination, there will always be one more number between you and it, a little further, a little higher, always just past the current total. The moment it becomes a practice, the ledger loses its grip, because it was never the source of the feeling to begin with, only ever a stand-in for it. The way a photograph of a fire can show you the shape of warmth without ever once making the room warmer. This is worth sitting with because it explains something that probably doesn't make sense on the surface: why some people with very little sleep soundly, and why some people with a great deal still lie awake. It was never really about the size of the number. It was about whether the number had been quietly promoted, somewhere along the way, into the thing responsible for your sense of okayness. Once that promotion happens, no amount is ever quite enough, because the job was never what a number could actually do. So what do you actually do with this tonight, in your own life, with your own version of Kava's ledger sitting somewhere on a phone in your pocket? 3 things, small enough to actually do, and none of them require you to change your income by a single unit. First, tonight, before you sleep, write down 3 things money cannot buy that you already own. Not things you're waiting to earn. Things sitting in your life right now, unpaid for and already yours. This isn't a gratitude exercise for its own sake. It's proof, in your own handwriting, that the feeling the ledger promises you already exists without it. Second, the next time you check a balance, just notice, without judging yourself for it, what you were hoping the number would give you in that exact moment. Comfort? Proof you're doing all right? Permission to relax? Naming what you were actually hoping for takes the number out of the driver's seat, even briefly, and puts the real question where you can finally look at it directly. Third, once this week, spend on something small with no calculation attached at all. A coffee for a stranger, flowers for no occasion, a meal you don't need to justify. Not as a spiritual performance, and not as an amount that matters. As a practice of proving to yourself that money can move through your hands without your safety moving with it. Kaveh, the story goes, started with a single coin left on the fairy monk's shelf the following week. It wasn't a donation. It was a small act of unclenching. Picture the monk now, years later, still by that same river, the light going amber over the water the way it does in the last hour before dark. His bowl is still empty most nights, and he is still, by every measure Kaveh once used, a poor man. And yet something in the way he sits there, unhurried, unguarded, tells you he is not waiting for anything to arrive. Kaveh visited him once a year for the rest of his life, and every single time, the monk asked him the same question, gently, like a ritual between old friends. Still checking the ledger? And every year, Kaveh's answer changed a little, until one year, near the end of his life, he simply laughed and said, "Less than I used to, and I sleep more." That is the whole of it, really. Not a story about becoming poor, and not a story about becoming rich enough to finally relax, because that number, if you've ever chased it, keeps moving the moment you get close. It is a story about a feeling that was never missing, only buried under the noise of a ledger that kept asking the wrong question. Somewhere tonight, you will probably find yourself near a version of that same fire. A screen instead of flames, a balance instead of a bowl. And for just a moment before you check it, you might remember the merchant who once sat across from a man with nothing and heard the truest sentence of his life. You already have what enough feels like. You have had it in moments you probably didn't even mark as significant at the time. In a slow morning, in a shared meal, in the quiet minute before sleep, when nothing was wrong, and you weren't checking anything at all. The work now is not to earn your way toward that feeling. It's to stop drowning it out. If this story gave you even a single quiet moment tonight, there are more waiting for you here, and I'd love for you to stay a while longer. Next time, I want to tell you about a king who traded his crown for a single night of real sleep, and what he asked for in return when he finally got it. Until then, walk gently, hold loosely.